So if you will turn page 244. Can you pull those blinds open in the back for me, please? Thank you. Well done. There are a bunch of nerves that come off of the brain itself, and they're called cranial nerves. And this shows them all. There's 12 of them, and they have names and numbers. Like, for instance, this one right here is the olfactory nerve. Y'all know what the word olfactory means? It has to do with the sense of smell. And those nerves sit right above your nasal cavity. And they have little extensions hanging down into your nose. So they sense smell and then send it on to the brain, down this fiber, you see. Guess where the optic nerve goes? The eyes. Guess what the oculomotor nerve does? Controls the muscles that move the eyes. Motor meaning movement, oculo meaning eyes. And so all of these things do various things that allow it's mostly the face and the tongue and the vocal cords and the ears and all and some of the facial muscles and such. They're all controlled by nerves that come directly off of your brain. So that y'all have probably heard of paralysis. Paralysis will often happen in the neck area when you break your neck, like during a car wreck or something, because your neck moves a lot and it could break it. You know, or football, people get paralyzed. Those people can still control everything in their face. Their nerves from their arms and legs and trunk of their body, the signals aren't making it up to their brain because their spinal cord's been cut. But they can still talk and swallow and move their eyes back and forth and all that, because that's all controlled by these facial nerves right here.
I could breathe.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Those signals. That's a good question. I don't know if those signals go down through some of these nerves or not. That's a good question.
Doesn't the heart kind of beat itself though? It's like...
Yeah, the heart has its own beat, but I don't know if theirs would speed up and slow down. But the diaphragm does have to be controlled. I'll look that up. It's a good question. Can't answer that right away. So those are the cranial nerves. Well, here's a thing showing what they all do. So you might look in there and see if there's anything to do with breathing. If not, I guess that would be part of the...
What are those things called when they have the like, little hole in the neck?
What's that?
What are the things called when they have the hole in the neck? Like,
Tracheotomy.
yeah, what is that?
That's to let in oxygen if it's not able to get through your nasal passages somehow. I remember having to memorize each of these in college. In college anatomy, you may have to do that. These are the spinal nerves that come off the spinal cord and control various organs. And we had to know some of these in our IDs. This is called the musculocutaneous nerve. And it's not just cut off right there. You understand it extends down the arm. All of these do. The axillary nerve. That's, you remember the axillary region is in the armpit? Y'all remember that? Radial nerve, that goes down the radius, the bone of the lower arm. I don't think we did median and ulnar and phrenic nerve, did we?
No.
I only had you do some of these. The cauda equina, you know, or equina, I'm not sure. I've heard it pronounced different ways. But the spinal cord here, as you see at the bottom, starts to become branched into different fibers, and it kind of looks like a horse's tail. That's why they call it the cauda equina. That means horse's tail. The femoral nerve is a really big nerve that goes down your leg. The obturator nerve, that's a nerve that goes through that obturator foramen, that big hole in the hip that we studied. And then this big one that goes down the leg is called the sciatic nerve. That's the biggest nerve in the body. This is a diagram that shows that the signals that are coming from and to the organs take different routes to get there. Here is, do you know what this part of the body is right here?
The small intestine.
That's the intestine. I think that would be the small intestine. And that is. This is small intestine. Signals from your small intestine go up like this. They're going towards your spinal cord. There's the cell body here. And this is one of those bipolar neurons. And then it continues on, and so it goes all the way. So one neuron goes all the way from the intestines into the spinal cord. Then there's a synapse, an interneuron in the way, and then it comes back out. And there's an area outside the spinal cord where a bunch of these neurons meet their next neuron. It's called a ganglion. A ganglion is a large collection of nerve cell bodies. So see that cell body right there? A large collection of nerve cell bodies located outside the spinal cord. And you have these ganglions running down through your body. They're almost like little brains, because that's what a brain is, a big collection of nerve cells. And so you have these ganglions located actually outside the spinal cord, kind of running down your back, where they synapse, and then a new signal is sent out to the intestine. And this keeps the food moving through the intestine. This is how the body controls, the muscles that squeeze the food along in the intestines. It's kind of a reflex that goes back and forth. And so that's an autonomic pathway. The somatic pathway, autonomic is control that you can't consciously control. Here's a somatic pathway, and you can consciously feel this and control these muscles to some extent. And here we go, something is felt in the skin, and it goes all the way to the spinal cord where it synapses. But notice for the somatic pathways, the signal that comes out of the spinal cord doesn't go through a ganglion. It goes all the way to the muscle that reacts. And you don't go through any ganglia. So the autonomic pathways all use these ganglia that are located outside the nervous system, and the somatic pathways do not. It's just kind of a difference in between the two, the way that the body is wired. And the book goes into some discussion on that.
So most nerves that would be like connected to limbs and other parts of your body would go straight to the spinal cord itself, not to the brain. And the brain would go.
Well, actually, what they'll do is they'll synapse here at the spinal cord, but they'll also send a message up to the brain.
Yeah,
so it splits off. And so the brain knows what you're feeling as well. So a lot of reflexes also go to the brain, just so you know what's going on. So back to those autonomic fibers. So here's the spinal cord, and here's these ganglions outside the spinal cord. And this particular diagram is showing the sympathetic division of the nervous system. If you remember, we talked about it at the beginning. The sympathetic system controls the fight or flight mechanism. And so these different, all the lines you see, for instance, when you get scared, if somebody scares you suddenly, you know, you're sitting at home, and ah! He scares you. A lot of things happen at that point. Your eyes dilate. Your tear glands dry up a little bit. Your salivary glands dry up a little bit. Your heart starts beating faster. Your airways widen, and your lungs are able to take in more air. You have most of your digestive system shuts down. Don't want to be spending energy digesting food when you're about to be attacked by a lion or something like that. And so all of these organs are affected by what we call the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight. And that shows you, these show you the pathways that the fight or flight mechanism uses. This shows the pathways that the parasympathetic nervous system uses. And this is the sleepy part of your nervous system. And they go to the same organs, but they have the opposite effect. Like, for instance, instead of speeding up the heart rate, the parasympathetic nervous system slows down the heart rate. And this answers the question that y'all had, why you can still control your heart and breathing. It looks like it comes down from the cranial nerves right here. The vagus nerve. You see that has some control over these organs. And usually breaks in the neck occur below that. So I think that's the answer to that question we had. See, all of these organs can be controlled to some extent through the vagus nerve right here, which is part of your parasympathetic resting state. So it looks like, if we go back to this picture, if you are paralyzed, you may not be able to get a signal down to speed up your heart and operate your fight or flight mechanism.
Do you think if you were paralyzed, your body would make up for itself through this nerve?
Well, usually when someone's paralyzed badly, this thing gets cut and it doesn't ever heal itself. And so you can only operate from these nerves that come out of the brain itself.
Yeah,
you cannot operate anything below that.
I was saying with those nerves cope for themselves instead of having to go through the spinal cord.
See, these nerves don't go through the spinal cord. But the spinal cord is down here. So they're not even affected. They don't have to change at all. One interesting thing is stem cell research. Maybe they could take stem cells, squirt them into the broken area of the spinal cord, and those stem cells become new nerves and reattach the broken spinal cord. That's what stem cell research is kind of working on. And that would be great if they could figure that out one day. All the politics going on, people wanting to hold up stem cell research, I think that's a bad idea. I think it's just delaying something that they're going to eventually figure out how this works and figure out how to cure a lot of injured people that way. I mean, hundreds or thousands or millions of people are injured waiting on cures, and if stem cell research one day figures out a cure for that, which I think it will, then we're going to look back years later going, why do we hold this up? There's so many people that could have been helped. So I personally disagree with that, but that's, political opinions. I don't try to spread too much of that during class. But That's something that it's hard for me to understand why we would hold up something that could help so many. Don't want to really talk about that. I want to talk about the nervous diseases that are on page 253. I was going to do this on Monday, but I'm not going to be here on Monday. So we're going to be watching a video about the nervous system. Should be interesting. An analgesic. Have you ever taken an analgesic?
Mm-hmm.
Analgesia means loss or reduction in the ability to sense pain, but without loss of consciousness. That's analgesia. And an analgesic is a pain-relieving drug. So if you have analgesia, you don't feel pain. You might think that that would be a good thing, not to be able to feel pain, but it's not. You wouldn't know, for instance, if you stepped on a tack, if you couldn't feel pain. And then you have a puncture in your body that you don't know about, which could lead to an infection, which could kill you. That's not a good thing. People who can't feel pain do very poorly.
What would be an example of one of those drugs?
An analgesic? Aspirin.
No, the one you're talking about when you can't feel pain as well.
Oh, that's not a drug. Some people have a problem with their body called analgesia, and they can't feel pain. Well, there's a lot of pain-killing type drugs. Those are analgesics. Anesthesia, loss of feeling. That's what anesthesia means. An anesthesiologist applies drugs which causes anesthesia, loss of feeling. Aphasia, disturbance or loss of the ability to use words or to understand them, usually due to damage to cerebral association areas. That's aphasia. You can't understand or use words. How much for just the tip of the tongue? Wait, I know the answer. You can't think of it. It's on the tip of his tongue. Apraxia, impairment in the ability to use objects. That's the only thing I can find on apraxia. Impairment in the ability to use objects. Ataxia, partial or complete inability to coordinate voluntary movements. Child with ataxia cannot touch the toy. They can't coordinate their movements very well. What's that probably a problem in? If you can't coordinate your movements?
Cerebellum.
The cerebellum, that's the part of the brain that coordinates movements. That's the kind of question they might ask on a test.
Isn't that a problem with encephalitis?
Encephalitis?
Yeah.
Cerebral palsy, you've probably heard of this. Partial paralysis and lack of muscular coordination caused by damage to the cerebrum. Cerebral palsy. A coma, probably heard of that. Unconscious condition which a person does not respond to stimulation due to a problem with the reticular activating system. A chordotomy, surgical procedure that severs a nerve tract within the spinal cord to relieve intractable pain. So they cut something out of the spinal cord and that relieves pain. There's probably some pain signals going through there. Some people have pain that they can't get rid of, and that you never want to cut something out of your spinal cord, but if that relieves it, that might help. A craniotomy, surgical procedure that opens part of the skull. Often if you have a lot of swelling or bleeding under the skull, they open the skull up to relieve the pressure.
Do they walk around? I mean, what do they have over?
What they can do is after the swelling goes down, they can put that back on.
I thought you were saying that they wear something over
They can take it out, take the scalp out, take this bone off, and then put it back on later. Electroencephalogram, EEG. That's hooked up, isn't he? Recording the brain's electrical activity. We study this in psychology, how they do experiments with that. If you want to take psychology, take it in college, you can study that. Here's encephalitis. Inflammation of the brain and meninges, producing drowsiness and apathy. The brain swells up. That's encephalitis. Itis means a swelling. Cephalic, referring to the head. Epilepsy, disorder of the central nervous system that temporarily disturbs brain impulses, producing convulsive seizures and loss of consciousness. Why those seizures happen is there's a lot of different reasons, but people have these epileptic seizures that are real bad, sometimes life-threatening. Hemiplegia, paralysis of one side of the body and the limbs on that side. That's hemiplegia. So if this side is paralyzed, if this side works, what do you think's wrong?
Maybe a stroke.
Perhaps a stroke? And where?
The other side.
Opposite side of the brain. In what part of the brain?
The cerebrum.
In the cerebrum. In what part of the cerebrum?
The motor cortex.
Very nice, Michael. The motor cortex. Huntington's disease, inherited disorder of the brain causing involuntary dance-like movements and personality changes. It's a genetic disorder we study in biology. If you receive the gene for that, it's a dominant allele. You develop normally until about age 40. Then your nervous system breaks down. You stop being able to control your movements, and you die in about 10 years. A laminectomy, surgical removal of the posterior arch of a vertebrae. Here they've cut the lamina. Remember the lamina on the vertebrae? They've cut that and removed the piece. Sometimes they'll do that to relieve a bulging disc. If one of the discs between your vertebrae is pushing out on your spinal cord, that can cause paralysis. If they cut this off, that gives it some room to be pushed out. Laminectomy. Monoplegia, paralysis of a single limb. So here's a bunch of plegias. Hemiplegia is half your body doesn't work. Paraplegia, you've heard of a paraplegic? Just the lower part of your body doesn't work. Quadriplegic is when all four limbs don't work, quad. And monoplegic is when just a single limb doesn't work. So plegia is something not working. And there's a bunch of different types. Multiple sclerosis. Loss of myelin and the appearance of scar-like patches throughout the brain or spinal cord or both. Multiple sclerosis is often called MS. It's when the myelin that surrounds your nerve, something's wrong with it, and it starts breaking down, so your signals aren't transported right. I got a buddy of mine who graduated in my class from Frederica in 1986. I don't know if you remember a teacher here named Miss Rue. Were y'all here? She was a kid?
Yeah.
Her son has MS. He's in a wheelchair. He can't get around so easy. It's a terrible disease because it gets worse. It never gets better. Just you slowly lose your nervous system.
You're not always born with that, right? Sure.
No, you don't have it at a young age. He was fine when he was in high school.
It's like me, break limbs, if you like break a limb or something, it can happen. That's what happened.
That can cause it?
Yeah, he had like a really bad leg break when he was in college, and after that, it happened.
I don't know if that could cause it or not. Neuralgia. Sharp recurring pain associated with the nerve. She's got neuralgia in her jaw, it looks like. Not too happy. Neuritis. Guess what neuritis is without reading it. Inflammation of the nerve. Very good. Itis means inflammation. Talked about paraplegia and quadriplegia. A vagotomy. Surgical severing of the vagus nerve. For example, to reduce acid secretion in a patient with ulcers non-responsive to other treatments. The vagus nerve comes down and part of it stimulates the stomach to secrete its digestive acids. Some people over-secrete the digestive acids, and it helps cause ulcers, which is bleeding in the stomach. So if you cut the vagus nerve like they've done there, then they don't secrete those acids, and they don't get those ulcers. It could mess with your digestion, so you might have to watch your diet and what you have to eat after that. That's an interesting fix. Okay, so that's all the different types of nerve disorders. The rest of the time we're doing IDs.